Hi, welcome back from lunch. Anybody raise your hand if you can't hear me or you can't hear not speaking into the microphone? This briefing is a lot about the who and the why behind internet attacks. There's always a reason, sort of a story behind the story, and that's a bit what about this briefing is about. I'll show you, I think, several ways in which this is some work that you'd need to put into this if you're protecting a large network of any type, especially if it relates to national security, large corporation. Obviously, the borderless medium of the internet brings Russian hackers, very close to you very quickly, and it'll be quickly apparent. Okay, we're looking at the briefing outline. Okay, we're going to look at Russia as a threat. This is not going to be too hard to establish. Russia as a resource. We're going to try and turn the tables a little bit and say, okay, if this Russia is sort of has expertise in terms of network security and software, and some Russians are after our secrets, all of that, sort of how to turn that around and exploit that. Then we'll talk a little bit about developing some kind of a method that you can use if your interest is China or the Middle East, say, that you could use to take it in a new direction. And this briefing is a lot about where you would want to take it anyway, because I understand, there might not be a whole lot of like Russia particular stuff you're working on, but I think a lot of this information is going to be applicable. And then we'll talk about the international political scene and where legislation is currently in regard to remote search and seizure, in regard to the European Cybercrime Convention, that sort of thing. Okay, Russia is a threat. Science and math are very strong in the Eastern Bloc, former Soviet Union. The national sport is chess. In the 1980s, there's some history to it too. They wanted to get access to our software. They either couldn't buy it, they didn't sell it there, or there was export control, that kind of thing. So there was a nice, healthy culture that started to be built up during the Cold War of attacking our software and finding out how it works and using it. The other thing is there's not perhaps enough jobs to go around. Other countries have this problem. Egypt, for instance, very strong university, very strong education, just not a lot of jobs. When folks get out, they move in other areas, and it's not always beneficial to society. So you could just look at some of the basic numbers here. But for me and you, we complain about the price of Microsoft Windows or the price of something shrink-wrapped at CompUSA. Well, if that price were your monthly salary, say, it puts it in a whole new perspective, right? There's no way you're going to be paying that kind of money. Okay, cybercrime. Since the end of the Soviet Union, we have seen it grow and grow. In the middle of the 90s, Vladimir Levin, over 40 times, accessed Citibank. And we still don't even know quite how he did it. It's a funny thing. He never sort of fessed up to it. However, he was able to access their cash management system and funneled about $10 million all over the world. So it was a successful arrest, a joint operation. But they got most of it back. But that went back to St. Petersburg. Also, the Microsoft source code hack a few years ago, that was traced back to St. Petersburg. Joe Lopez down in Florida, this is a very interesting story and very current. He had core flood virus, Trojan horse on his system, and somebody in the former Soviet Union moved about $90,000 out of his account to a bank in Latvia. Now, the funny thing is the Bank of America was his bank. They said, hey, this is not our problem. This is your problem. Somebody logged in with your username and password and moved $90,000. Well, Joe turns around and he says, look, I don't know anybody over there. You should have safeguards against this kind of activity. You know that cybercrime exists. But it's a big fight, and it's not that easy to solve because it was a legitimate transaction. Everybody had the proper paperwork and all that to cover the transaction. This guy you may have heard of. I got to hear his talk, DEF CON 9, just before he was arrested. by the FBI. Essentially, he said, hey, look, we have cracked the Adobe ebook software, and you can buy this program for $99 that will give you free access to, to all books. Essentially, you can copy, cut, paste, print, and to your heart's content with this program. Make a long story short, he was eventually let go. They didn't want the bad PR and all that, it goes to show that, as we'll see with the drink or die and the peer software coming out of the Soviet Union, there's a very healthy culture in the former Soviet Union for sharing software, for cracking things and sharing them. It may be a bit of a cultural difference as well between at least Russia and the United States. What I want to stress to you here is that if you have a zero-day exploit, you can essentially turn that into cash. And that's what a lot of Russian criminal gangs are doing today. Cybercrime is doubling every year, according to the Russian authorities. And this kind of money will generate, new exploits, will generate, a whole lot more crime. Essentially, you can imagine, there's money. This is going to proliferate. There's been some arrests. Last year, there was one of the reasons they go after the gambling, online gambling, is because there's a whole lot of money there. I don't know, but if you take an online gambling site off the internet for just a couple hours, that is a whole lot of money that they're going to lose. So the former Soviet Union, there was some gangs that were essentially DDoSing UK gambling sites, and then sending them a letter saying, unless you pay us, $50,000 a week, we're going to keep you off the air. And so that was successful. There were some arrests, but again, the arrests are very few and far between. This is a recent attack. The group Hang Up, very sophisticated Russian group. So what they did here, this was not for DDoS, this was not for spamming, so it was almost certainly just to collect information that would bring money to the organization. It's a for-profit group. So what they did was they compromised IIS servers. There was this footer option, right, that was they could exploit with Windows IE browser. And so you visited a website that was infected, right, had got infected via a worm. And your browser would invisibly go to this IP address and download a keylogger. And that keylogger would grab your username, password, sort of financial information, various sorts, and send it back to Russia. Now, the reason this is important is because a couple reasons. One, Microsoft had a fairly strict schedule in which they updated their patches. It was a big change for them. They changed their schedule to update their software in response to this. And the U.S. CERT on our side declared after this that you probably shouldn't be using Internet Explorer. That you should use another browser, or at the very least disable JavaScript. So Russian malware, these are all the stuff. This is on the Computer Associates side. I just sorted by Russia. You can do that. You can just find which programs are written in which countries. And they fell into every single category that they had on the Computer Associates side, from Trojan to downloader to spam and really the gamut. Social engineering, Russian style. This is a hugely profitable market. Where this is one of the basic needs of human beings, is to find love and happiness, and this is being exploited all the time. The U.S. Embassy in Moscow says that they get up to 10 calls a day from American men who are looking for their Russian loves that they have been corresponding with via the internet. There's a couple of interesting cases with this. One Canadian man, he led to the arrest of this couple in Russia. He was sending lots of money, and here's this is great. The site was set up this way. There was a virtual store where you could buy virtual gifts for your virtual girlfriend, none of whom existed, right? But it would take your credit card, charge you, $59.95, and she would send you a letter saying thank you very much for the gift. The only thing is there was no girlfriend, and it was a couple that was doing it, and they made about $300,000 doing this. There was one interesting arrest was made after an Australian man wrote a personal letter to Vladimir Putin. So you might want to try this. If you really get upset, you can write Bill Gates a letter about something you have. But he wrote Vladimir Putin a letter, and he said, look, I've been sending thousands of dollars to this girl, and I can't find her. I've been to Russia looking for her and all this. Well, there was an arrest made there, too. One of the last things I want to say about this is that credit cards and the internet and sex sites is a real dirty business. There's a couple companies, CCBill and iBill, and basically there's so much money to be made in that and it's not altogether clean. The way it all works is fairly easy for the CCBill and iBill to take credit cards and process money. They take a large cut. Right, and and if it turns out to be a stolen credit card or whatever, they will just write that off as a loss. But there's so much money to be made. It's relatively easy for you to sign up with these groups and steal credit cards and buy things, right? Because just the nature of the transaction is so quick and so hard to track down. And let's face it, most people don't go item by item through their credit card bill every month and make sure that every little transaction is legitimate. So that group says that they've had so much trouble with Russia that they really view sort of any kind of Eastern Bloc request for business with suspicion. Criminal communication. In Russia, they have public web forums which you can, sort of get your feet wet, but they become closed at a certain point. You need recommendations. They will check you out, your goods and services, but these exist, and I can show you. Here's a carding world, and here's a couple of places you can go, Russian websites, sort of to begin. If let's say you have a botnet that you want to charge money for to take down somebody's site, that kind of thing, or this is money laundering, pornography, that sort of thing, you can actually start at a public web forum. So you can announce here some of the services you might offer. Ideally, to make money and get respect, you're going to have to get your nickname out there so that. But I was assured this is not an easy thing to do, and you're checked out by the good sites. The system administrators will check you out in a heartbeat and see how legitimate your stuff is. So you're getting paid web money, started in Russia. It's an international thing, kind of like a PayPal or something. But again, I had an interview with a Russian guy, and he said that if the good sites that you want to be on, he said you do anything foolish and they banish you forever from the system. Drink or Die started in Russia. This is one of the really big wares groups. Expanded internationally. There have been international arrests. Operation Buccaneer was a major international operation. Bandito was an Australian. The Saint lived in Arizona. And the Saint, his server had so much software on it, and he made so much money, and he eventually moved it from his ISP to his house. The host name was God Complex. But a very successful, both in terms of making money for Drink or Die and also for Operation Buccaneer on the law enforcement side in this case. Okay, let's just change a bit toward things of interest to those who work in the national security or intelligence community. Hacktivism. During the war with Serbia, Russians very upset with the West over our actions there, so they took out their frustrations on American and British sites. They stole some British, evidently some military databases. We claim there was no impact on the war effort. However, when emotions run high in kind of international conflict, you can bet that just like with the EP3 incident between U.S. and China, and sort of all of the hacker activity surrounding that event, this kind of thing will take place. Much more serious is real espionage. So here's the new alphabet soup in Russia, the old KGB, now you've got the SVR, the equivalent to the CIA, FSB, kind of FBI, FAPSI, NSA. So there's a lot of this, obviously espionage that goes on. You can go to any local library and read all about it. But just kind of point you to Robert Hansen as maybe a spy who, in this day and age, has a lot to offer us in terms of understanding things we should be looking for. This was in the 1980s. This is 20 years ago. He was sending encrypted bulletin board messages to his handler. So you can imagine 20 years later, that things, that cyberspace, encryption, wireless, all of these things are dramatically impacting the security of your network. Put it that way. Information warfare. Some of you may know about the revolution in military affairs. Essentially what it means is electronic command and control of units and bringing things together in large databases and facilitating military operations around the world. Right now, in advanced countries, these kinds of things are receiving a real investment. And I'm on the defensive side, and to understand it on the defensive side, you have to, of course, explore the offensive side so you can see what you're up against. The ultimate goal, right? This is far from, I'm sure, possible today. But what do I know? Is a digital Pearl Harbor. In which, if you're going to war with another country, you could essentially, turn off the lights and win the war without having fired a shot or without taking any casualties. Now, this is interesting because it is a practical example of cyber information operations having taken place. So you probably know that Russia is sort of embroiled in conflict in Chechnya, which is down south, part of Russia, and it's really, really nasty. Well, the first major conflict, Russia disallowed any media access to the troops. That was a big success of ours going into Iraq when we allowed the media in, basically to show them our side of the story. The way it turned out, the Chechens allowed them in the first, and so all of they got to put all the spin essentially on it. So we kind of give them 1-0 for the first war, and then the second one. There's a lot of allegations of Russian state-sponsored hacking at that point. And then one of the ones that I want to mention is, you may remember the hostages that were taken at the theater in Moscow. And simultaneously, when the theater was stormed by Russian special forces, a number of these Chechen websites went down. So they were, clearly targeted by the Russian state. At least one of them was hosted in the United States, in Houston, I think. So that's kind of interesting. That joint operation, who knows? But it could have been very well that the Russians were involved. On our systems, there's a tangible example of that having taken place between our two countries. So the summaries after the Soviet Union, you've got all this great math and science and a lot of great research. Basically. That was in a closed society, now is in an open society, and we sort of see the results of that. Some of these viruses and worms that have been written in Russia truly have had a whole world impact. And then one thing to know about the cyber crime in general, and in a country like Russia, is it really impedes sort of, in certain ways, the establishment of a true market economy. If nobody is paying, for legitimate products or software, sort of they are either buying wares or they're cracking software. That's not as big of a deal as this money being recycled into other more nefarious crime. Okay, let's try to turn this on its head and look at Russia as a resource. How can we exploit all of this, this base of good software understanding, of hacker activity, and the threat, essentially? If they're threatening your networks, right, it's better from your perspective to try and turn the tables a little bit and look at Russia as a resource. So these are some of the hacker sites that are out there. They're real easy to find and well known. The top right, that's a magazine put out by Hacker in Russia. Here's some of the sites, just include the links. Here's the Civil Hackers School, sort of the equivalent in France of the Académie, right? Now in Russia, they also have the Civil Hacker School, so this is well known. And in this case, you can find the whole site is in English and Russian, so this will be easy enough for you to go through and check out. So let's try and look at a Russian site and see how you would approach tackling this. So this is a CyberHack portal, cyberhack.ru. Everything's in Russian. Let's just try and dissect it a little bit. Here's the CyberHack motto. Hacker is the Russian for hacker. So they take a whole lot of foreign words. The Russians really don't mind that. You know how the French actually have they outlaw this kind of thing, and they outlawed the usage, if you knew that or not, of email, right? So they call it courrier électronique, but it's actually outlawed to use c'est mon email, that sort of thing. In this case, Russians love this. So hacker, same word. Взлом is attack. Защита, defense. Программирование, исходники. Халява, soft и проги. That's the motto of this site. So those are the basic things to look at. Here's how it's broken down on the site. Really, all you need is a little, and I'll give you the links, but all you need is a little translator, and you'll see that it looks a lot like what you'll find on an English language hacker site. It's the same, a lot of the same tools, a lot of the same resources. Let's see. My topic. Here's a place you could go, for instance, once you just have a translator. There's a lot of free ones on the net to download. So archive on the left of articles, and so you could download articles and have them translated. And if you know enough about the field, you can sort of put in things that were left out by the software. But here's all. The first one at the top is essentially translated as how to take over lamer IRC channels. So you can see that it's been read 10 times. It was posted in March. So there you go. There's something you may want to know more about, and it's not that hard actually, just to grab a translation program and toss it out there so you can see what it is. Here's the downloads. So they've got tools here that you can download related to passwords and Trojans. They got literature, and Russia's a very literary place. So here's sort of another plug I'll put in. A reason you might want to do this. They're good writers. They're good thinkers. They're really good at math and science. So this kind of thing would be a resource, a potentially valuable resource for you. Here's the top 10 downloads, and I looked on insecure.org, and really of these 10, there was only one on the top 75. Now I don't know that some of them haven't been renamed. That's entirely possible. However, but it is also possible if you collect tools that you might go to foreign language sites and download tools that may not be in use over here. Essentially, here's the discussion forums. Look at that for a second. This would require a little bit more of a challenge, but again, I was practicing it, and it's doable. You can have one window open here and one window open here and translate something and then drop it in a chat window. There is nothing illegal about that. So here's hacker tools. So this is on the site, right? So port scanner, anonymous email, and DNS informer. So it's kind of cool to take somebody else's tool and maybe use it in their own environment. So you can't really see it; it's too small here. But essentially, I took the port scanner and did Kremlin.ru. So that you can do that, and you can see the ports that Kremlin's got open. But there's a little sort of word of the day for you. Старший брат всегда смотрит за тобой, не забывай это. So Big Brother's always watching, don't forget. So this kind of little thing that you may get out of this research as well. So here are the two contacts. You can. Here's the two guys that run the site. No pictures, but you could certainly email them and with any questions. Okay, so I've given you a site like this to look at. You're like, okay, great. There's a lot of resources online, and I'll give you those links in a second. But talk for a second about natural language processing is essentially spoken languages you're familiar with, you may have studied in high school, bringing those into the cyber world. Machine translation is allowing computers to do the translation for you of, obviously you can't do this with literature or poetry. It sounds terrible. But if it's the weather, if it is how to fix a bike, if it's really is a technical manual, you can, especially if you're an expert in the field, this is doable. All it really requires is post-edit or proofread. So you might find on the internet, I found a number of professional translations of things. So here's a good article, How to Become a Hacker, and this kind of thing you'll find posted in other languages, because if they're sort of a classic in our field or a classic in the Russians' field, it's not that hard to go find a copy of War and Peace at Borders for the same reason. Here's some free translation sites that you can go to, and here's commercial. Some of them get very expensive, but I guess they can be quite good. And one of the things that would set the services apart is that you really need thousands and thousands of idioms, of special terminology, and language grammar rules, essentially. Subject, verb, object in Russian looks much different. It's not subject, verb, object. It could, literally can be verb, object, subject. It changes by the second, just depending on how the speaker wants to express an idea. So let's look at quickly at translation software and work. So here's Smashing the Stack, and I dropped it into a free service, into Babelfish. So if you know where that is, it's really a good service. Just go to Alta Vista and click Language or Translation. And so Babelfish is really pretty good. So this is a hard task, by the way. So I took something in English, took it to Russian, and then back. But you can kind of see some of the differences. And some of them are funny. At the end of an array became the end of an automobile. I have no idea why. H programming is kind of interesting because it was C programming, right? But there's no C per se. There's a C, but it means something else in Russian. So C became H programming, and then when it became Che in Russian. But when it comes back to English, it's H. So that's the kind of thing you obviously have to watch out for. But I kind of highlighted some of the main differences. But really not too bad of an effort, because it's a very difficult paragraph to both to write, read, and understand, especially to translate. So bear in mind that there's a lot of tools out there. Now Windows actually is very good with Cyrillic. You just, you do Alt, Left, Shift, and go between the two. Notepad and Excel and everything. You know what I mean? It's really quite good. But there's a lot of software out there that you can find rather quickly. Okay. Here's some of the meat and potatoes of the presentation. Now, how do you take this and sort of come up with and turn it into a plan? I want you to be able to say, I can do this for some target or some analysis that I'm doing. Okay, so I had to think of some way to tie it together. So I did it with T's, and the tribes is essentially. Let's say you're going to invade a country. Good idea to know as much as you can, right, about the history and culture and language and religion. One of the things I want to say there is, can you imagine, very easy perhaps to compromise an email server, for some folks in here, but it's a difficulty of a much higher order to know what to do with that access, right? You're talking about, all these other things, these anthropological issues that you have to bring into play in order to exploit that compromise. So know something about the tribes, and then you know something about the country, essentially, in particular the telecommunications infrastructure. So you want to know as much as possible about that, right? Techniques and translation. So something about Russia, okay? Russia in the 12th century kicked out the Mongols. Right? In the 17th century, they took Siberia. In 1917, Communist Revolution, right? And then in the 1990s, or 80s and 90s, we saw Glasnost and Perestroika. And essentially right now, you've got a country that's really struggling to become democratic, that's struggling with a conflict in Chechnya, and is trying to get its economy market-based. And I think some of the things that the current president is doing right now is very counterproductive, but that's the reason the chess player there, Kasparov, he may challenge Putin in an election. I think he's interested in politics. Okay, so you're used to looking at a little map of Russia like you might find in your atlas, like the little one below, but actually for us here, a much more interesting map is the big one that you see at the top. So I like this map because it really shows you very basically, these are the main three fiber optic lines that run through Russia. They're ATM, they carry voice, video, and data traffic. And so they go up into Scandinavia, right? They go down toward Turkey, and it goes the big line that really cost a lot of money to do and was done within the past 5 or 10 years is the Moscow-Khabarovsk, which goes all the way to the east. And so these are the three main, and it goes down to Harbin in China. So this is what the telecommunications map looks like, right? And so you can see here it says the level of development of the internet. So the white one there in the middle, it says almost completely undeveloped. But you can see, obviously, the population centers are the main things that you're going to see the axis turn on. So Russian telecommunications, RU, SU is still around, Soviet Union, sort of a legal fight over that for some reason. So the number of internet hosts and telephones, all of this is of interest to you if you're looking at from a defensive or interactive perspective a foreign country. The international connections, essentially what types of equipment they have and how many, how up to date and all that. There's thousands. This is one of the good things because they really opened up the economy to a certain extent, and there's literally thousands of telecommunications providers now in Russia. And there's over 60 regional capitals have digital infrastructures. Okay, RUNET, this is very interesting. So essentially, kind of like AOL, right? Everybody within this domain belongs and has a certain type of way that they access the internet, certain things that they're looking at, just like China is doing. RUNET is sort of Russian cyberspace. So in Boolean logic would be Russian and internet, but it's by Russians for Russians. And according to the interview I got, is a hacker guy, right? He's telling me it includes even the stupid users. So that's a good term to know. Now, internet usage by country. Here you can just see that Russia may not have a small percentage of its population online, but they've got a lot larger population than a lot of other countries. You see Sweden's at the top in terms of percentage, but Russia, and of course this will have grown since then, is far ahead of Sweden in the number of users actually on the internet because the country's a lot bigger, a lot more people. Here's just another way to color code the sort of connectivity, but you can see the bright colors have more folks, and as you get out west, there's more and more reindeer and fewer people. And especially right now, what you find is that the two cities, Moscow and St. Petersburg, are pretty much sucking up the whole country. This is a huge problem for Russia. In the post-Soviet Union, it's not all collective farms anymore. People want to come in and have real jobs and get connected to the internet and all that. And everybody is moving to Moscow and St. Petersburg. There's really a shrinkage in the population going on. So here's a kind of an interesting network map as well, because you can kind of see the spoke diagram. Like they say, all roads lead to Rome, or if you're in England, like even in the tiniest little village in England, evidently they'll tell you that there is a street that points to London. So London is far and away is just the hub, and same for here. You can see that if you want to get from point A to point B, essentially in Moscow, in Russia, you're probably going to have to go through Moscow. Here's maybe the most precise network map that I was able to find. And one of the things I'll just show you here is that the satellites, up. So you've got that main backbone through Russia, but some of it is really quite isolated. And so you'll find that it's going to be via satellite, those kinds of connections. Rostelecom was Intertelecom, Sovtelecom, and now is Rostelecom, and it dates all the way back to the 1800s. And Rostelecom is the big provider for Russia, and they built the first link from Moscow to Japan in the 1800s, and they're still there today. So it's definitely, if you are interested in Russia and the internet, Rostelecom is the important player. So you can find these kinds of maps on the internet, and use them, or you can build them yourself. So you can sit down with trace routes, which tell you a whole lot of good information about the internet. How long does it take to get from point A to point B? If you want to go from here to to the Congo, why do you have to go through South Africa? You know what I mean? That kind of thing is really important, especially if you're sort of involved in network security sometimes. So a traceroute will tell you a lot about the internet, essentially where the data is going and how it gets there, and who might be able to access it along the way. Tells you who owns the network, can be used to track down bad guys. So the programs like Visual Route here, you can see, you type in an IP or you type in kremlin.ru and it'll show you visually where you're going. But the way they did this is by triangulating, right, the connections to the internet from around the world. So, it's in Beijing, they'll try trace routing it from 15 different directions, and you can triangulate the location based on that. But they obviously incorporate all kinds of open source information into this tool as well. But it'll tell you right where it is and point it out to you on the map. Or you can do it yourself. The slower way, but this is the best way to do it because you're in control of the data, right? So you can go out on the web and pull down literally thousands and thousands of host names and IP addresses and plug them in just to a little file like this, and you get back information that you then can turn into a map of your own. So in this case, coming from the States, you can see going through that northern part through Scandinavia. But you can see, if I want to go to Kaliningrad or I want to go to Sakhalin, how do I get there? And it's usually going to be through Moscow. But you can do this kind of thing yourself. Here's some, if you would like, some of the major IP ranges that you could begin with. These are the big service providers in Russia. And a lot of people are going to put together information for you. So before you go out and write a paper, or before you go out and try and do any kind of research, the best thing to do is figure out how much of this has already been done and is available for you. So a lot of people hate spam, for instance, and so they build websites like this to catalog and database the bad guys on the internet. And here's some of them, just a place to start. But some of them you can see are far from complete. Spamcop.net had no Russian at all, reference to Russia. Okay, so a few years ago, I went to the SensePost hacking class, which is really good, and they said, where do you start, right? Where do you want to start with this kind of research? And you start with the home page, and you'll be shocked to find how much you can learn at the home page of a target or of an attacker. So here's the official government portal for the Russian government. But this is the only page that you will find with a good English word-for-word translation. Not surprising, it belongs to the president, right? So it's his personal page, and again, it's mirrored perfectly, and it's all in English and in Russian. The cybercrime website is really a great website. There's a whole lot of good information in there. It is only in Russian, so you'll have to use your translator. But there's a lot of good stuff here. I guess it's only in Russian, but the title of the thing, Cybernetic Police. So just below that it says «Компьютерная преступность и борьба с нею». So computer crime and the fight against it. A lot of good information here. SORM down on the bottom. You've heard of the map. You've heard of Carnivore and Echelon and all that sort of thing. Well, this is the Russian version. Just so you know and aware of that, you can click on it and read about it. And they say, hey, look, we've got lots of crime here. We've got lots of national security issues. This is the way we help to protect the internet. But freedom of speech folks and EFF and all, SORM is pervasive. It's everywhere. It made a lot of news, if you remember, by just essentially requiring all ISPs to do about 15 things and catalog pretty much everything everybody's doing on the internet over there. Okay, there's just a whole lot of places that you can drill down into this, but I want to show you this just because if you're a law enforcement person, then here's where you would find the official definitions in Russia for legal definitions that you could use if you needed to say, hey, I've got a problem here. I've got somebody who's attacking me, and here I see in your legal code, here's exactly where it will show you that this is illegal and you've outlawed it, and so on and so forth. They have cybercrime statistics all the way back to 1982, and so I translated the 1982, and it was kind of funny that they only referred to her as Miss K. And Miss K was involved in an organization in the Soviet Union that dispersed money around the country. And what she had done is essentially the salami technique, right? Is you just slice off a little bit every day, hoping nobody's going to notice. So she got into the code essentially and was, taking some money off every day from where it was supposed to go and sending it other places. So it occurred to me that it would be fun to sort of see if she's still alive and send her some kind of a DEF CON award. So here's all the cybercrime offices. Not all of them. There's actually 89. But these are the ones that, and I had to take them off for just space reasons, but they all have websites. So you can visit all these places and get the point of contact information and all that. Here is the top Russian cyber cop. I emailed that office, not necessarily this guy, but I explained to him, I'm doing this, I'm writing a presentation about Russia and cybercrime, and, I just had these following questions, if you could answer them for me. And this guy actually wrote me back, so it was very interesting. The top guy, he wrote me back, and I can show you, he's very well accomplished, as you might expect with Russians. To get that kind of position, you have to have, a PhD with a highly regarded dissertation and all of this, So obviously a very good student, I'm sure, knows what he's doing pretty well. So anyway, he sent me an email back, right? He answered all my questions, and essentially he said, there's 89 offices. The majority of them get email every day about some type of cybercrime or another. He said that they have been doing more and more meetings with international offices. He said especially the FBI. He says we need to, the main thing that he thinks we need to do is be able to kind of unify our strategy here in terms of format for data sharing and all of that sort of thing. So anyway, he seemed like a good guy. So here's some questions that I had put together. I didn't send him all of these, but I'm just suggesting that this is one thing that probably needs to be done on the international level so that we can facilitate, you have something like, a child porn ring or something, certain types of crimes need to be acted on and the people taken out of business. So here's just some questions, right? But there's probably maybe 100 questions that we could, collectively come up with that would be good to translate in 25 languages so that we could more quickly take action on that kind of thing. Here's someplace you could start, words of that you could throw in there that are relevant to. Here's one word you could start with in a whole number of languages, and of course you'll find that a whole lot of hacker stuff out there, probably in every language. And one of the things you can do, if you've never really thought to do this, I'm sure most of you have, but you can, if there's anything interesting like that, and you don't know how to write it, you don't think your machine can do it, just you can go to Google and type in hacking, and say, I only want information that comes back in such a language. But then you just grab that and throw it back into the search engine, right? So you can get a lot of good information, even if on the web, just by cutting and pasting, right, and screenshotting things of interest, because the internet knows what hacker in Chinese is. So you can take those and drop them find news articles of interest. Here's a number of Russian newspapers that are good. But again, they're only in Russian, so that's why that the sort of cutting and pasting needs to be done. So there's anti-spam sites, just like the English ones I showed you earlier. They got the same thing in Russian, right? But some of these resources are only in Russian. I'll just end this section of the presentation with mentioning the most hated man in Russia, according to the Russian I interviewed for this slide. And this guy is interesting because Kaspersky is huge, and they just made their big entry to the U.S. market in February of this year, I think February 8th. And so they are definitely planning on having a large suite of security solutions for business and home. And they're very well regarded is the thing. They're clearly very precise in what they do. They're very good at writing antivirus signatures. This guy's he's been studying it for a long time. He's evidently quite smart. And but of course the problem is then from on the international level is that you deal on a Russian product, especially you're working, in the national security community, that kind of thing. So these kinds of questions that people ask. But the software is pretty good, and they're definitely trying to take on the U.S. market right now. I think they just incorporated in the States in February as well. He had a real interesting interview in which he said, part of the problem right now, he said, 10 years ago, he said malicious code was just a hobby, and it was a relatively small percentage of the malicious code that you would find on the internet that is related to criminals. He said, but that is growing just dramatically, as we talked about in the first few slides. The kind of money that can be brought in with a successful cyber attack means that a whole lot more is being invested in this. And he said it's quickly gone from a low percentage up to 90% now. And he thinks it is directly related to crime. And as far as Russia goes, he says Russia is not the top target for the United States if we're to be worried about somebody in cyberspace. And he mentioned Brazil particularly. Well, let's just talk for a few minutes about what's going on at the political level. There is no end of websites that you can find. Here is just the ones I found for the UK. So if you needed to go, there was you resolved an IP back to the UK and it related to any one of these topics, you could quickly find where to go to complain about it, to report it to law enforcement, or to find more information, essentially, about it. International law is funny. A lot of people, laugh at it for a million different reasons because, if you're a country, you don't want to do something, you don't have to do it, right? You can invade my country and force me to do it, but apart from that, it's sort of, international law is very touchy-feely, and if you feel like it, if you get around to doing it, please help us out. The internet is just obviously changed dramatically. Now it's essentially borderless, and applying nation-state type borders to the internet is almost impossible. Although, like with China, in a case like that, maybe trying to do just that. We all know that the virus written in the Philippines, the "I love you" thing, just wasn't illegal there. They hadn't thought about developing cyber law. So you get a really wide variety of things, and you get Microsoft, for instance. Evidently, somebody has collected a bounty that they had put out, but they're obviously they're keeping that discreet. And with the Half-Life 2 case with Valve, they just appealed to their fans and they said, "Hey, can you help us find who stole the code to the upcoming game Half-Life 2?" And lo and behold, that person was found. So sometimes you have to take actions that are not necessarily outside the law, but for which the law is not well prepared. So extraterritoriality. This is like remote search and seizure. It's a difficult question. You can't hope to interview all the people who are crossing your border every day. How difficult it is to look at all the internet packets. Well, it's obviously impossible. International investigations, they suffer from a lack of good log data and expertise. Evidence needs to be collected quickly, or it disappears. That's just in general, but especially with the internet. You know what I mean? There's log cleaning, but there's also nobody is going to keep data around forever because it's expensive to hang on to, and it's a lot of work essentially. And of course, freedom of information groups and all that, they're constantly battling the government to not have to do that kind of thing. But you got to realize that the government's in a position too where they might like to allow self-regulation on the part of ISPs, but they're not so crazy about that because they've got to enforce the law. Okay, so here's the big case, right? You may be familiar with this. So in the year 2000, the FBI is following all these cases. There's at least 40 major institutions in the United States that were hacked, and they're following it back. They did a lot of research. They see it's coming from Russia. They didn't get the kind of help from Russia that they were looking for. So what they did was they set up a front company in Seattle, and they invited, based on their investigation thus far, they ID'd 2 people that they were pretty sure were involved in the operation. So they sent them an invitation. They found their resumes in Russia online, right? So they they brought them over to Seattle for an interview, and while they were there, they said, "Hey, we want to see your skills." And so they logged into a server in Russia, to demonstrate, some of the things that they had done security-wise. And of course, the FBI immediately arrests them afterwards and uses that log-on information to download a lot of evidence for the trial. So it's extraterritorial seizure, right, which is very controversial. Is it inconsistent with international law? Yes. I mean, and the reason is because countries do not want hardly ever to give up any part of their national sovereignty, right? And there's really good reasons for it. I mean, it's open to abuse. It's open. I mean, you would allow other countries to spy on you. Essentially, they'd be looking for things that wouldn't, that they're not supposed to have access to. All that sort of thing. So essentially, what it boils down to, law now is the international law is just developing contact information and the right phone number to call. But all that, of course, it takes a long time with the language barrier and political barrier and all that. And if the two countries don't have good relations to begin with, what are the odds are that one of, if you're coming from Iran, that we're going to be able to get good cooperation, you know what I mean, from a country that we have an adversarial nature with. So all of that is real dicey. There's a lot of, one of the examples is satellite pictures, now that you can download on the internet and pay for. People are comparing, this is a legal question, right? They're comparing remote search and seizure not to a physical invasion of a country, but more like taking a picture of a country or using binoculars or reading their newspaper, that kind of thing, right? So they're trying to make a legal case that would support remote search and seizure for international investigations. One of the main efforts underway to develop international law to tackle these issues is the European Cybercrime Convention. And again, all of the things that I just mentioned are sort of part and parcel of this. You have certain elements who want to require ISPs to keep all the data, and you have other groups who are asking, they're arguing that shouldn't be done. But one of the main things about it is that even with the Cybercrime Convention, there is going to be no international hot pursuit on the internet, right? So essentially, it's going to boil down to consultation. And right now, I think it's the European countries and Russia, Brazil, Scandinavia. They are, we're essentially developing a sort of a tighter system of contact information. But the problem is of course, all the countries who are not part of the convention, there's essentially, safe havens or territory that maybe a hacker would route their communications through. In the future, I just suggest you need a few things if you want to, if you want to do any kind of international investigation. Is you got to have sort of technical capability, the legal authority to do it, some kind of sovereignty, and obviously we didn't have that with the Russians, and so that led to all of the what happened. And I'll just leave you kind of with a story. There was a UK group that was trying to solve a cyber crime, and so they were, they had tracked it back to China, and so they contacted the PRC CERT. And whether or not this was entirely the case was unknown to them, but they could only find one person to talk to, basically from the UK, and that person didn't speak English. So they were kind of left with that, and of course, finally, they found a Chinese speaker in the UK, and the Chinese speaker talked to the person that they could find at the PRC CERT, and actually, the site in question was taken down, and they had some action on the investigation. But essentially, that's what it looked like to the outside world. So if you actually have to do an investigation, they said, from all appearances, there was one guy working there, and he didn't speak English. So I'll leave it at that, and sort of encourage you to take this type of research in directions that would benefit your organizations in the future. Take any questions you have.
How much is the Russians regulating the infrastructure? How much is the government regulating the infrastructure? Does that seem to have any effect on cooperation?
Well, like I mentioned with the Swarm project, I mean, they've been, a lot of the news, they're requiring a whole lot of their ISPs in Russia, right? And so it's a culture that probably be a lot closer to, to tighter control of the citizens, than we would be comfortable with here. As far as I know, the ISPs, they have strict rules, and they have essentially been required by the FSB, their version of the FBI, to install equipment to bring data back to law enforcement, right? So the problem with that is that then you get into, are you presumed guilty? But there's no presumed innocence there. If all of the information is flowing back to law enforcement from the get-go, then essentially they're reading, or they're in possession of stuff in Russia that's not necessarily stems from any crime, but they've got it. So that's where they are.
Why do we see Brazil as being now the top target?
Right. Well, I mentioned that's what Kaspersky said in his discussion. Brazil, I know that has a healthy hacker culture, and I'm sorry. Non-extradition, and they have a history also, and I'm by no means any type of expert on South America, but I know that between Brazil and the United States, there's a lot of distrust, and there's not great cooperation there. And so, I mean, if you wanted to route your traffic, if you wanted to attack the United States in cyberspace, you might want to route your information through Brazil. But see, one of the things like with the Israel-Palestinian cyber battles that took place some years ago, you found, in this case, the Brazilian hackers took the side because the Palestinians, Israelis were going at it, right? So then the Palestinians started hacking, supposedly, American sites, and the Brazilians were more than happy to jump in, right? Because, I mean, it was in the papers, and what you'll find is things that are reflected, things that occur in the real world tend to also be reflected in the cyberspace. So like with the war over Serbia, with the EP3 incident in China, with the Israel-Palestine thing, even with Israel-Palestine, you'll see, like, for instance, if there's a suicide bombing, you'll see the number of denial of service, the number of hack attacks skyrocket in the Middle East, right? Because people they read the paper and they go home and they want to take some kind of action on their own. And you might not want to be a suicide bomber, but you'd be more than happy to try and hack somebody's site or DDoS them, right? You're not putting your life at risk there. But yeah, so all of this interplays with cyberspace, what's going on in the real world, essentially. So that's with Brazil.
But they are part of that new consortium.
Right. That's what I read. With the ECC, I think it said that it was, the EU, Scandinavia, those are that are outside, probably Switzerland. I didn't see Switzerland, though. They're a little bit different. But Russia, the US, and Brazil were the ones mentioned. So I guess they're trying to get some of the big players on board.
Did you actually learn Russian for this, or did you actually speak Russian beforehand?
No, I studied Russian a long time ago in school. So I just really like it. So I'm trying to bring some value added to a conference like this by taking something I know a little bit about, and passing it on. It's really trying bringing it together. It provides some value added. But yeah, I know and I like Russian a lot. And a big fan of Russian literature and people. I mean, it's a really, if you haven't been to Russia or haven't read much Russian literature, I highly encourage you to do so because it's really well worth it.
So how would you sort of overall characterize the law enforcement effort? It's borderless media. It's a global thing, borderless media. It sounds like there's some disconnect, there's a lot of disconnect between the FBI and the Russian cyber.
Right. Well, the odds are stacked against you. What the FBI is doing right now, they call legats, or legal attaches, and they're putting people out in the field. They got 44 countries now that the FBI has put folks in, so they've got people out there trying to solve cyber crimes overseas, and they claim that there is no substitute for having somebody in country who can speak the language and work with the law enforcement. That's almost certainly the case. But you can imagine the odds are really stacked against a successful international cyber investigation. Because let's say that you work for a company and you've been hacked and you trace the IP back to Egypt, right? Yeah, what are you going to do? You can pick up the phone and call Egypt. I mean, somebody's going to answer the phone, and they're probably not going to speak English very well. So you've got this huge time lag in which you could get people together who have the technical expertise, the language ability, and the motivation to work together, essentially. And at that point, let's say then that was a hot point, and it goes back to China, right? I mean, it's a very hot, steep mountain to climb. An international investigation like that. So, any other questions?
So one quick follow-up.
Yeah.
So if you compare the FBI, we know what they're doing, we see a couple things they're doing, versus you said they have 89 or something
Right.
different law enforcement efforts there. Culturally speaking, is it less of an emphasis there, or a different kind of an emphasis?
I didn't see any less of an emphasis when I was looking at Russia. It seems like that they've got a lot of pieces in place to law enforcement wise. I mean, they had quite a lot, and like I said, I emailed over there, and the top guy emails me back with answers to my questions. I mean, I was fairly impressed, and just given sort of their background of, I guess, with the Soviet Union, being fair, really staying on top of citizens, not having a lot of. I assume that they've got a wealth of information in there about folks and their communications internally, especially. But I didn't see. I mean, I felt like there was a lot there that at least you could exploit if you tried to bridge the language and cultural and political barrier. You know what I mean? Between you and that type of cooperation. So
Are they one of the 44 countries?
exactly, the legal attachés. According to the FBI website, they're in 44 countries. And they, of course, if you go to the FBI website, they have a number of things that they have, success stories that they claim in regard to the success of their legal attachés abroad. So. Anything else? Thanks a lot for your time. You're all welcome to email me or give me a call. Thanks.